recording, and let's get ahead with the lecture, lecture number 4, and in which we will continue by recapping the previous lecture. So if you have some issues ahead, and please let me know, or feel free also to come up with a question via chat or any other mean throughout the lectures. Okay, as the chat window is here open on my right side, and today we'll be talking about although only 3 concepts. They are very, I would say, very heavy in the context of evolutionary economic geography. And path dependence, lock-ins, this is a core concept within path dependency theory, and then path development or path creation, and the good references in the online platform that can support further the explanations of these concepts. What I will be sharing with you today is only a part of what will be explored within these concepts of economic geography, that they emerge from evolutionary economics as well. And then the literature provides you better, more detailed explanations, but they still lack a number of empirical insights that they could help you to understand better. And this is the challenge I have as a teacher, to convey you in the best way possible these concepts. There is certainly a lack of empirical research in these domains that could help us to grasp better the real meaning of these examples. And now recap here our previous lecture. Then we stayed in between this idea of supporting a green transition. We underlined the issue of entrepreneurship, or the importance of entrepreneurship in the context of evolutionary economic geography, and we focus on green entrepreneurship. And I gave you examples of countries or supranational institutions such as the United Nations trying to pave the way to this green transition. And I underlined to you that it's important to focus on the governance arrangements behind these transitions, also understand the power relations, and here you can disentangle these power relations as the incumbent interests of private actors, lobbies from different sectors of activity, from different industrial sectors as well. And it's important in your exercise of building this line of reasoning to go beyond the global north. What you see here in this map as the blue the blue part of the world. And it's important to also look what is going on in the global south, both in terms of theory building, in terms of concepts they explore, and eventually find interesting practices that can be used as a benchmarking to provide policy recommendations to countries in the global north. This happens very much in the other way around, and there is a lot of literature also underlining this dominance of the global north in terms of theory building. But the global south, and this is something I advocate strongly, they also have been developing in practice interesting methods and processes of organizing territories, of organizing the economic landscape, and also in terms of concepts. And then the literature, both produced in the global north and global south, they can be consolidated and combined with one goal, for example, sustaining these green transitions. And there are examples in the global south, and this is only one example, more related with spatial planning, management of urban core urban areas and urban regions, but is very much related with the economic landscape, because these systems of transportation, their prime intention is to support commuting of the workforce. So there is this idea of the bus rapid transit started in the global south, in a city in Brazil, and rapidly expand across the global south to other countries in Latin America, as well in Southeast Asia. And there are already some examples also in Europe, in which they implement partly this bus rapid transit system. So an initiative that has been inspired by different experimentations within planning, but could be applied elsewhere in the world with some interesting gains in terms of facilitating the commuting of local communities. So this to say that these innovation processes in the global south we can call the exploration of a certain niche not related with a profit, with a for-profit activity, but to improve the well-being and quality of life of the citizens, that has been expanded or exported to elsewhere in the world with some interesting or positive effects. So if you have the opportunity, try also to think through and evolve in a way that you can engage with both literature and practices from the global south. And let's get back to Europe, to something that will impact our future, or there are strong hopes that it will impact our future. Critic remains, and a lot of doubts also remain about the impact of the European Green Deal that is currently being discussed across the European Union member states. And the ultimate goal is to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. Very easy to say, very difficult to achieve. This goes beyond the Green Deal. It applies also in many other policies. So here the Green Deal assumes or brings the European Union to play a role in policy making across the member states in terms of environmental related measures. And I bring this here because there are a number of policies that will impact the organization of the economic landscape. And the ultimate goal is to support to some extent this green transition, transition to a more sustainable way of organizing society in overall sense, social aspects, economic aspects. So, and this involves, these are the four cornerstones of the European Green Deal: the carbon mitigation, the industrial policy, more dear to economic geography, sustainable investment, in which I underline here the intention to support green investment. So this to somehow to build here, to bring here a pillar on this discussion we had in the past, like around green entrepreneurship, with the idea that this will certainly will be explored further on in terms of research, as well in terms of practice in the member states. And again, I put myself into the question that is this really breaking a development path here? Is this really something new, or will be more of the same as business as usual? There is still a lot of interrogations around the true potential of a Green Deal in supporting this transition. And there is a social component here, very important, the just transition, a specifically funding scheme that intends to support this transition across the European member states in a way that this transition is equal. So every country, every member state, and the communities within have the equal choice to invest in the sustainability transitions and to improve that green growth patterns, including the support towards green entrepreneurship. And the European Green Deal covers different sectors of activity, some more related with the environment, other more related with the economic aspects, such as the circular economy action plan that we see here on the top, one biodiversity. But now we have to acknowledge as a students, as a researchers, as a citizens, that we can't no longer achieve economic growth by neglecting biodiversity conservation, by neglecting the impact of economic growth in tropical forests, for example, so beyond Europe. So the idea of the Green Deal is to acknowledge all these elements, but sometimes by acknowledging everything, we tend to or be superficial or neglect some of the aspects. Very ambitious, is out there, and it will impact also policies within countries. But again, we already see that some member states are already really accelerating the transition. Germany, the Netherlands, the Nordic countries, while others still very much lagging behind in this transition. And these uneven developments, also a core preoccupation of economic geographers, will probably remain for the years to come. So here is already escaping this European Green Deal discussion and trying to summarize the past lecture. Is this really this transition towards the green growth, green entrepreneurship, green innovation is really that easy? So there's a number of critics that tell that, well, there are a lot of challenge until societies can really reach this green grow, implement these green grow patterns. So the green technology require a lot of critical mass, a lot of specialized workforce that devotes attention to improve current technologies, current processes, and this requires multidisciplinary competences, and this also requires a lot of funding to bring different experts together to improve specific processes. And investing in a green business in comparison to mainstream business, let's call, also requires a lot of coordination between territories, between regions, and between also sectors of activity. And what we encounter in this context, more of the same, or what I have been mentioned to you since the first lecture: governance arrangements, power relations, to consider very seriously who is playing the key card in defining certain strategies intended to reach this green transition. So, and when we talk about clusters, networks that are that will be located where the green entrepreneurs are located, this to some extent favor one region or favors one sector in comparison to others. And to overcome all these issues is necessary to have this strong collaboration across sectors. So it's very difficult to tell that we can really pave the way to a global sustainability transitions. But again, I do not intend to be very much negative in these aspects. Neither these references I bring to you here, they also acknowledge that at the steps, we have to take these steps and not remain very inactive in the sense. So it's important to at least embrace the challenges and overcome the challenge when they come, and start building networks around the issues in a way to solve them. Also, investing in green business implies large amounts of research, and in comparison, and this is increasingly larger or requires much more funding for research and development to focus on green business in comparison to more polluting technologies. Okay, this is very important in specific in countries where the funding mechanisms to support this transition are still lacking, and very much and not yet supported by, for example, the private sector, that often provides important financial resources to the development of technologies, also funds to some extent research and development in universities or research centers. So it's important to also build one discourse and build narratives that the way forward is the green transition. And again, it's necessary to solidify, to push forward this green transition. Is necessary public subsidies, also seed capital to finance spin-offs, for example, and have these private actors on board and build what they call here venture capitals, and also try to go beyond this using own money to fund spin-offs toward targeting green business, for instance. So this is all very complex, and there's always a balance necessary to balance here the risk within the investment, and understand still it is very much rooted within the business community, that the green entrepreneurs, they to some extent, they also lack inspiration. So literature also suggests that the role models are important to solidify a business, if we are talking about mainstream business. So we need these role models within green business, we need green entrepreneurs as role models to inspire others to develop ideas further, and then lead to eventually or niche, or eventually create a new path that we will talk later. And this some extent a fear that the winner takes it all, because the entrepreneur has solid relationships with other business sectors, with more mainstream business that can found specific areas more towards environmental aspects, for example, or more social dimensions of the business. So there is still fear that the winner will continue taking it all, and then we are not opening, not doing this transition is not in a way that becomes integrative and integrates this different sectors of the society. And another aspect here is beside these role models is important is we have to understand if the consumers are ready to pay for the products or the service that result from a green entrepreneurship idea or resulting of the green business. They tend, because they require much more resources in terms of financial fund, they require financial capital, they tend to be more expensive, although they have other characteristics that may also justify their price. The relation cost benefit, it still play a role in the consumer's mind. So it's necessary to do a balance between our risk attitude, the behavior of the entrepreneur, and this is very much a spatial, a very context specific, a very spatial specific dimension that we are asserting here. And this also has to do with this risk culture. There are some countries such as the North America, they are more they assume a risk-taking attitude in comparison to other countries where they fear the risk of failure, and this impacts the growth of business. And I know that some of you are also familiar with this context of fearing the risk or fearing failure within the process that can lead to simply to a known investment in green business already. So how to overcome this? We need more successful examples, and we also need to use probably mainstream media or social media to convey successful measures. You know that the negative message often they get across quite easily, but we also need to convey successful message regarding the success of investment in green business. And there are studies that try to make this comparison between countries in terms of their strengths and their weaknesses regarding the green entrepreneurship environments and how they can or support or hinder the green growth strategies. Some examples in this paper here. The key issue is that the lack of money and the lobbies, they are the weaknesses of Germany regarding pursuing green growth strategies. Okay, the dispersion of research and development means, budget constraints, the role of lobbies. Okay, they have other strengths. They are more related with embracing the sustainable development issues since long time, since the beginning. You remember this evolution of the sustainable development narrative. So Germany has been embracing this sustainable development, so paves the way. So we are building it in evolutionary perspective, paves the way to solidify green growth strategies. And there are already a number of mechanisms supporting the transition to renewable sources of energy, solar, wind. And in another context, for example, this is very different what's happened in Japan, in which they suffer, for example, of one of the grand societal challenges that affects many countries worldwide, is the aging of the population that works here as a weakness to move towards green growth strategies. However, in my point of view, and some literature also agree in this regarding this aging of population, it can also open opportunities for other kinds of for other groups of the society to invest. For this needs to be consolidated with, for example, migration policies. So this can open opportunities for foreigners to move to the country and develop their green growth strategies. However, in the case specific of Japan, the cultural background, as I mentioned here, that's the intention of this slide. The cultural background probably will create a lot of barriers, entry barriers to these foreigners to really invest in green business and support an overall transition. So a lot of different elements here that is interesting to explore. And if you are curious about this publication certainly will help you to understand how context specific, how spatial place specific this idea of investing in green businesses, the green entrepreneurship that plays differently across regions, across the world, and talking about global sustainability transition. It still requires both research as well as more effective policies that can bring different experts together, and require also policies in terms of funding mechanisms to support the development of this business. Okay, this idea was the idea of these slides to recap the previous lecture. And before we embrace this path dependency and path creation heavy topics here, is important we do a break. And this is just one article in which you can read. This is not part of evolutionary economic geography, that tells you that doing these breaks is fundamental to activate creativity, and this can help you also in another when you are doing your assignments as well. So let's do a quick break here of 5 minutes, and then we come back to the core of this fourth lecture. All right, so see you in 5 minutes. All right, hope everybody is back. Please let me know if you have any questions regarding what we just discussed before. It's very important. I don't know.
I would like to add something to the migration due to innovation and startups. I read today that in Germany, each fifth startup founder has a migration background, and they have also it's quite difficult for them to get capital, but they take more risks. And like BioNTech is the most prominent example for that. So it's not bad to have migration into Germany. So they bring also new startups and innovation.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very important aspect. And then, although the literature still is lacking in this regarding, there's a number of studies from colleagues of mine actually in Norway that they are exploring the innovation capacity of migrants in the country. And in some countries, it may play better because the institutional background, and you know that institutional context plays a role in organization of the economic landscape. We discussed this quite intensively, and in some countries, migrants, they may find easier ways to implement, to create, or to start up a business, for example, than in others. But it certainly is playing a strong role in many European countries, as well as in North America, United States. Lots of example in this context. So the fact that, for example, Japan is considers the aging a weakness to develop green entrepreneur, maybe this also leads to new opportunities for other investors with a different, coming from a different background to invest. Certainly, that's an important aspect. Thank you for bringing it. And I don't know if you would like also to talk about this risk attitude, which is very important also across countries. This risk attitude towards startups. If you have some experience that you would like to bring, please feel free to do it. And otherwise, we'll carry on this end. Today, I'm feeling a little bit less energetic than the days before, and so my apologies for that. And let's see if we can have some fun here until the end of the lecture. And again, what we'll discuss is related with the discussion before, and it still, you can explore this through green businesses as well. And you can in this when we are talking about our clusters or path dependency, path creation, that means the developments of a new path within a sector or within or within the region. You can underline also the role of different policies, including migration policies, to what extent they are intended to support, to attract, not only to attract the talented, because I also consider that this kind of talent attraction, which we discussed before, they can lead to uneven development and can raise inequalities. But an overall migration policy that can support those that decide to migrate or to build or a business or to carry out any other kind of activity. Now, the focus we bring is more on we play between these micro level, firm level, the meso level, industrial sector, for example, and the macro level, the regional level. And everything starts by acknowledging within the literature, especially Martin here, everything starts with a critic towards this geographical clustering, as we talked before, these clusters of certain types of firms, of a type of industry. This discussion within path dependency very much is related with the weak points of these clusters. So the clusters, they build up on local pools of specialized labor. They take advantage of the embedded knowledge that exists, or what we call here the knowledge spillovers, that helps to develop or new firms, or to branch out to other kind of activities that can complement, and therefore they are related with these activities. And here is just an example to underline some of the clusters that exist in Germany. And then there's also different very specific literature, both in English as well as in German, exploring different dynamics within these clusters. So the literature on one side emphasizes these positive aspects of this agglomeration in terms of network, leading to niche creation, path creation, innovation process, but then also some negative aspects of these clusters. And it is in this context of the spatial clustering that the path dependency started entering the narratives, the discourse within evolutionary economic geography. And it's important to go through these slides a bit more slow and really try to understand what they say. And you remember we talked about Schumpeter as the founding father of entrepreneurship. he starts exploring the innovative research happening within these clusters, and he starts arguing that history has one important aspect when study economics and this process that lead to a continual process of innovation and lead to entrepreneurship. So keyword here is the history. We already discussed this, the evolution through time, historical processes that impact what certain regions and what certain regions are currently. And within the field of technology, fundamental, and you know that technology relies very much on innovation processes and research and development, the path dependence has been used as a tool for understanding process of lock-in, a concept that is can be how do you would you say this is very much the definition is implicit, is something that is and that it is entailed, is locked in, but the justification within evolutionary economic geography is much more challenging than that. So they start using the path dependence to understand these lock-in processes in changing technologies, understanding to what extent the path dependency or these historical processes lead to them to be to find roots in a specific process to the point of not being able to go beyond that historical process and evolve or in the same direction, but leading to gains, or to develop in another direction yet complementary. And path dependence and lock-ins are both important notions within evolutionary economics as well as within evolutionary economic geography. And the economic geographers they start using it to explain these negative sides of the economic cluster, particularly in old industrial areas. So when for some historical processes, a number of industrial areas, so agglomerations, clusters, start encountering difficulties, start finding finding themselves locked in development process, then economic geographers came in to try to understand these processes. And while we use path dependence to understand the decline in old industrial areas, one way is important to understand the factors behind, the reasons behind this decline, and also understanding if through time, through this historical process, to what extent they were able to overcome this decline, what factors they use, or what elements they held themselves to overcome this decline. So it happens in different ways. The way they economic geographers try to understand, okay, they enter a declining process for this and that reason, but they, at some extent, some of them, they were able to overcome this stagnation, this decline, and they were able to respond to these shocks, to these unforeseen events that could take them from this decline moment to a more evolved or a consolidated stage further on. So they could prosper. It's important to understand the reasons behind these elements. And there's a lot of literature explaining how these industrial areas enter the decline and how they could overcome this decline, what they use to continue a prosperity path into the future. And some examples probably will help in this context. Geographical concentrated clusters, they can become inward-looking systems, and so they are very much centered in their own characteristics, in their own routines, in their own processes, and they can't really rely much on what is going on in another industries, because they use very specific, very specialized or labor force or certain raw materials. They lead with certain aspects of the production process that are very unique. So this on one hand is beneficial, but on the other can lead to lock-in, for them to be jailed to some extent in that specific process. And this is very typical, again, in all industrial areas. And why? Because they are sometimes monostructural areas, and you will hear about this also further on. What does it mean, these monostructural areas? We are talking about regions or areas, let's call it territories, in which the dominant sector is only one industry that employs the majority of the population. We're talking about mining, for example, or automobile, textile, heavy industry, in which this industry dominates all the territory and absorbs the majority of the labor force. So they are monostructural areas. These are, again, for example, steel, coal mining, shipbuilding industry, very important also to consider in Europe and elsewhere in the world. And they are very much specialized in consumer goods, such as the textile or shoemaking sector. So these are, it's very common you see examples across the literature regarding this specific sector: shipbuilding, heavy industries, textile, including the shoe making. They are very specialized. Okay, they use very specialized labor force. They are capital intensive. They are labor force intensive as well. And these elements, in one to a certain moment in history, they are important, but because all the surrounding environment is evolving and is innovative, is integrating new ways of embracing business, is eventually currently integrating renewable energies. And if they are not capable of following through this innovation process, they may be locked in. And before advancing within the path dependency, because we are talking about lock-ins, even though when you are reading the literature such as the Handbook on Evolutionary Economic Geography that is in your HomeLab platform, folder 1 or 2, it's important to try to disentangle this lock-in process, which again, it can be very much self-explanatory, but is a complex concept to some extent, and there are some articles that explain it quite well, and you can grasp their definitions, including one from the group leader of economic geography in Kiel, Professor Robert Hansig, explains very well this lock-in process with examples, and we'll get through that. So the lock-in, what does it mean? The lock-in within economic geography captures the idea that the combination of historical contingency, this historical process, and the emergence of self-reinforcing effects steers a technology, industry, or regional actors along one path rather than the other. Okay, within they are locked in a specific development path. Just think about shipbuilding. So they are very experts in building ships, and because the market calls for, or the demand is higher, they are able to respond to the market needs. So they can easily just keep following their path because it's a solid path. They can prosper with this path. However, they are ignoring what is going on in the surrounding environment, and what leads to them, different aspects leads them to continue this development path. That is institutions playing a role, trade unions, there's also political decision making. There are lobbies that are very much interested in keeping this path. Okay, they are locked in. They can be locked in a way that is positive. Okay, they are locked in, but they are progressing. They are absorbing labor force. Okay, they are creating additional job opportunities by keeping in the same development path. What happens sometimes is there are certain shocks, certain unforeseen events, as you saw on the slide before, and I will give you examples later on. And the literature, Martin, summarizes this process. And if you want to go deeper in this explanation, then you have to go deeper in the literature and also explore this some years back. And Graber, if I'm pronouncing right, emphasized that the role of path dependence and lock-ins as concepts explaining the lack of renewal in an old industrial area. So, and basically, if we are just talking about lock-in as just a mere concept within evolutionary economic geography without the preoccupation and understanding very much the theoretical roots of it, we could just conclude this part of the lecture by saying that, okay, there's a lack of renewal in all industrial areas, lead the lock-in. But this entails much more than this. They can be locked in and still being able to prosper to a certain time, but can also be locked into a moment that they collapse. They enter in the decline and they collapse. And most of the case, that's what happens. And happens partly in many parts, happens partly in some areas in the southern part of Europe, such as northern Portugal, southern part of Europe, but northern Portugal, some parts of northern Italy as well, and also some parts of Germany in which heavy industry, monostructure industry were taking shape. And I tried to bring this to a day-to-day examples, with my apologies if this sounds very much superficial, that I have this preoccupation of trying to define the concepts the best way possible. And again, because I found this path dependency and lock-ins also hard to grasp in terms of teaching. Day-to-day examples, what is the lock-in? Is that we are enclosed. We are surrounded by same method, same process. Just imagining, position yourself when you are writing an essay, for example, and you feel incapable of writing, to the point that you have to go or to a coffee shop or to do some jogging outside or whatever. And the way that you try to really break that barrier that is in this blocking you of progressing. This happens the same. This is a metaphor that happens very much the same in the industrial context. This can also happens in terms of your language skills. Sometimes we are locked in our settings, in our cultural setting, our language skills. We are incapable of going further because simply we don't have the skills. Happens the same in the industrial context. And Neil, you would like to intervene?
Yes, I was interested in a more a structural analysis of lock-ins, and I would like to ask you if you think that lock-ins are a concept that happens in highly capitalized areas where the profit motive tends to lead firms and entrepreneurs and stockholders to only go in one direction because profit motives basically support specialization in that direction, that it's so specialized that they can't look left and right to the market. So all of the most of the times that I learned in school from lock-ins in old industrial areas, it was the state that out of path dependence and lock-ins, especially in the Ruhr area in Germany. So I think the market and the profit motive leads to lock-ins, and the governance, and most of the time governance helps to get out of lock-ins. And I just wanted to ask you if you think the system as a whole, or the structure of our workforce or labor force, is supporting these lock-ins.
Yeah, definitely. I think the next slides justify that. Also, these both the paper from Hansik and the one from Gernot Graber in Germany, in the Hafen City, they explain well that indeed the capital and the profit capacity of these sectors lead to lock-ins, and then there are a lot of different forces, mostly from stakeholders, as you said very well, that somehow justify why these specialized industries are locked in, and for them to be able to go beyond this declining, this locked in process, they require the intervention of the state, indeed, by through specific policies, through investment in complementary activities that can, to some extent, also absorb part of the labor force in a way that does not allow the region to enter a decline, but only the industrial sector enters a decline. However, parts of it can enter the other production processes, so they branch out to the other activities, or they completely disappear, but yet they can still, part of the labor force can enter another sector of activity. So they are capital intensive, and the forces, what I mean by forces is these stakeholders, the lobbies and or trade unions, they play a role in keeping these industries within the same pattern. And you are absolutely right. This is difficult to grasp, and the literature it remains, there is still a gap in the literature truly explain, to disentangle this lock-ins process. And there are different explanations for this process, but partly partly the institutional background of these industries composed by private actors. They are in favor of these industries to remain in the path, because to some extent they help their activities, although they may enter a declining process further on. In a moment of history, they are important for them to continue making the profit. But when they reach this stagnation and eventually a decline to the point of a bank going to bankruptcy and disappear, then the intervention of the state is required. And this happens in many cases in Germany and elsewhere in Europe. And also within the European Union, there are some specific policies, mainly those linked to the European Union cohesion policy, that are intended to support these lagging behind regions, and most of them are old industrial areas. This paper by Graeber explains very well this ties within the rural area, if you are interested. And now I don't remember if I was able to download this paper and put it in the OLAT. Then I will check it. I think I did. So, and I think the next slides also justify these lock-ins a little bit better than this in the day-to-day context in which we also sometimes find ourselves locked in. But again, locked in sometimes is it happens because of historical accidents, because of shocks. Others happens because of what Neil pointed out. There are forces, external forces, I mean, not embedded within the industry. They are not CEOs of the industry, but they are or investors, or they have other kind of activities. They need this main industry to continue development so they can also progress and continue making profit. So there are different reasons that lead to these lock-ins. And again, this Graeber, he points out these obstacles within three kinds of lock-ins. He calls or he names this one of the functional lock-in, refers to this hierarchical temporary relationship, particularly between large enterprises and small and medium-sized suppliers, which may eliminate the need for suppliers to develop so-called boundary-spanning functions. Okay, there are a number of activities in which that result from the relation between a large enterprise and a small supplier. So they exist in a relationship that one depends on the other to continue the process. It is a functional link, although the question of Neil embraces these three dimensions of Graeber. It is very much related with what Neil commented here. That's these relationships for these medium-sized suppliers to continue making profit. They need a larger enterprise to remain in their path. If they decided to invest in alternative sources of energy, if they invest in eco-innovation processes, then these medium-sized suppliers, if they have less capital to reinvest or to renew that process, if they are not capable, to continue supplying this heavy industry, they will just disappear. Okay, there is the interest of these medium-sized suppliers, and often they are associated in trade unions, for example. So they make lobbies, they create lobbies to pressure the large enterprise to remain in the same path, because they need the large enterprise to continue making profit. Exactly what was pointed out. What's happening in this context, and is explained also in the book of Evolutionary Economic Geography, sometimes there are external shocks, there are crises that impact this process. Okay, they will be locked in, but they will still progressing. Okay, that's what is important to retain here, and that's where I think the complex, in my point of view, the complex of the concept remains. They could perfectly continue this lock-in, although you could question the power relations that exist. These small size suppliers, they will continue absorbing labor force. The large enterprise will continue to progress and be able to making profit and distribute the growth eventually across the region. So there is a win-win situation. They are locked in, but they are progressing. However, because they are monostructure, they are capital intensive, the exit barriers are very high. Means, what is these exit barriers? When they reach to a level, okay, we cannot continue progressing in this direction. The market is not asking for our products anymore. Okay, let's just exit and then go to do something else. Very simple as that. But exit barriers are very high. They have a lot of machinery to solve. They cannot use that machinery for anything else. So the exit barriers are higher. And when comes a crisis, and this happens throughout history, that's again, you put it in an evolutionary perspective, that they lead to a situation of crisis. You have the crisis in 1772, probably the most well-known, the Great Depression of 1929, and you have the financial crisis of 2007, very recently, and we also have the current crisis, the healthy crisis, that is also leading to a certain decline of some activities, although we all think this is to some extent temporary, but already is creating a damage in the business tissue around, in particular in the small and medium-sized towns. So there's this lack of these functions in the suppliers in switching to new markets and in times of structural crisis. So they are incapable sometimes of responding to other needs of the market, and they are locked in that process, but not in the way they are progressing, in the way they are lagging behind and eventually will disappear. So the lock-in can be translated not being able to advance. Okay, sometimes they advance within the same path, but it's some sort of these external events occur, unforeseen in some circumstances occur, that they don't find a way to continue progressing within this path development, and then they require the intervention of the state. If the state can provide, can support this structural change, this regional structural change, they may be able to enter a new development path. If not, they eventually will collapse, and then the market will need to absorb the labor force. So what economic geography does here is they look at the past to understand the reasons behind these lock-in processes, trying to understand the forces behind them, and also understanding how certain regions or how certain industries within these clusters were able to overcome crises, overcome these external shocks, and develop towards new paths, towards new business. So, and eventually this also has been leading to new concepts, new approaches as well, in terms of in a more theoretical terms within economic geography. And also an example of day-to-day, if we think about the current crisis, COVID-19 crisis, that has been leading, well, first is impacting negatively a lot of the small business, and there are a lot of questions you can also criticize that has been creating or solidifying inequalities across our cities and urban regions, but also led to the experimentation of new businesses. Well, this is an example more related with the management of cities, but also led to the development of more eco-friendly means of distribution, supporting the distribution of goods in cities and regions. Also led to the development of micro interventions in the core urban areas, leading to eventually other kind of more cultural activities, and has been also influencing the development of new platforms. We can criticize also that the current some of the measures led to an increase in online shopping, and then online shopping, if we explore the supply chain of the online shopping, particularly the distribution through road mainly, lead to a higher ecological footprint in the environment. So on one hand, we have alternative businesses responding to the crisis, eventually coming up with these niche products, entering a new market. Eventually this will lead to a new path, but we are in a very early stage to understand that these new paths can actually be developed out of this crisis. But a number of innovations have occurred within this context, and Lars Cohen explores them in that paper. So there are different ways of responding to crisis, and again, this is also very much influenced by this governance, the territorial governance behind these regions. And then Gruber continued defining these lock-ins as a cognitive lock-in, in which a specific discourse continuous leads these industries to remain in that path. You know, there's the discourse of failure. If we explore other strands of business, we may fail. We don't have enough skills to enter these other domains. Eventually, more innovative, more in which the digital, for example, platforms are used more intensively. We don't have that culture, that development culture, that innovation mindset embedded in our structure. So this leads to this cognitive lock-ins. And in this context also, there is also the political lock-ins, in which these institutions, they are pressure forces that influence a certain industry to remain in that specific path. They support more traditional ways of doing or embracing industrial processes, and they tend to slowing down industrial restructuring. So there is a number of forces very much related with the culture dimension that lead to a wicked progression towards out of that path. Okay, I hope this is clear enough, and if not, we can discuss this whenever you feel like. Just please feel free to intervene, and within this, trying to summarize these drivers of lock-in and the lock-in situation. What happens in this context? So first, one of the first reasons is the competition lead to these lock-ins. Number of other activities across the world, they compete and lead also to lock-ins. We'll see the example of this competition. But again, we have this incumbent interest, the interests of private actors, of stakeholders from the private sector. We have the power relations, and we have some also political radicalism that to some extent they are very much attached to cultural values, and then they slow down this progression, and so leads to these industries to remain in that path and being locked in the process. Very well explained in the Hansik 2010. And again, this is a very much a game in which the key actors determine to some extent and the path development, and play a role in the lock-in processes. And in this context, we also have these large corporations and multinational firms. They also play a role in some of these lock-ins, because again, it's very much their profit-making process very much depends of a number of suppliers remaining in that development path, and also the other way around. Many of these small-scale suppliers their survival depends on the maintenance of one industrial sector in that specific path. And then again, this is also in line with what I commented before. This political lock-ins, in which these large firms they do not want to keep up their capacity of continue attracting investments. Then maybe the market is telling a new discourse are telling, okay, you cannot continue investing in fossil fuel ways of production. You have to embrace more eco-friendly processes. But then they're still making profit out of their own activity. So this leads to a continued process, and then eventually they are able to still attract investment for their areas, although the market is calling for something, although the optimal way of behaving is already in a different level. But because they are still capable of or making profit or of attracting investment, they remain in this development path, and also to some extent the political sector, local authorities, because these large industries within this specific region, they play a role in absorbing labor force, and those they are an important players in maintaining this social balance. They receive some political support as well, and this in the what's happening is, if we bring this to a regional context, well, we have been discussing to some partly the industry. They are located in the geographical cluster, so we are talking about a specific territory, and but definition of regional lock-ins refers to this interrelated interrelated lock-ins that exist in a certain region, or they occur at the regional level, and how these industries within the region can overcome these lock-ins. The literature points out to two strands: the adjustments and the renewal processes. Some of them they are able to adjust, some of them are able to renew, but also are unable to embrace this renewal process. How they do the adjustment? The adjustment mainly happens is what we call happens in a more requires a more superficial intervention in comparison to the renewal that requires a more in-depth intervention within the region and within the industries. Adjustments happens mainly through cost reduction and coping strategies, changes in the process that lead to the cost reduction. And within the renewal, what occurs mostly is innovation and diversification. This will enable or disabling this cluster to sustain its prosperity. So this is very much depends on who is behind this the industry and how they embrace certain shocks in history. Let's see. I think probably with example this will be better understood. So we have a lock-in process, for example, in the shoe making industry. They can embrace an adjustment through cost reduction, or they can embrace a renewal process through innovation and investment in research and development. What can happen? Or they can continue in the path with a cost reduction, and they will be able to remain in that path for some more time, okay? But probably they will reach a level where these policies of cost reduction and coping strategies are not able to keep them financially sustainable and lead to the collapse, or they can embrace a renewal process and then develop a new type of industries. They can invest, if they have capital enough, invest in high tech shoes, for example. Why this requires research and innovation, and not all industries. Some of them, they are very small. They are even located in a garage of some buildings. They are not capable of embracing this innovation. And in some regions, probably in the more advanced ones, the governance structure, governments, local authorities, through policies, they are able to support this research and development, and eventually will try to explore the linkage between universities, for example, and the production and the industry. In the industrial sector can lead to new technology, but in other cases, this is just not possible. And then this is more dramatic if we are talking about monostructures, and we're talking about capital intensive and activities such as the mining, in which they will not be able not to explore alternatives ways of putting their products in the market, not alternative ways of, in this case, extracting the raw material, and eventually they will be locked in to the point that they collapse. I think it's important that before advancing to the examples I have on Germany and South Korea explaining these lock-ins, we do a break here to try to catch up some breath here, and we come back to these regional lock-ins and evolutionary economic geography. All right? Okay, see you soon. Okay, let's continue now towards the end. Any question at this stage that you would like to ask? So if not, we will carry on, but feel free to intervene at any time. We'll bring two examples that also explain it in Hansik 2010, Germany and South Korea. And before the examples, Norbert Hansik give a summary of these regional lock-ins. So they can overcome them through adjustments and renewal. We'll just talk about that. And the factors behind these lock-ins can be related to the economic structure. We talk about this monostructure, capital intensive, high entry and exit barriers, all right? It can also be political institution, and in most of the context, in the regional context, you cannot make a true distinction between economic structural and political institutional. Behind the lock-ins, there is a combination of these different manufacturers, and this explaining the examples of shipbuilding and textile in Germany and South Korea. And we have here the role of institutions to some extent hindering progress within a certain path. And the examples of the textile in both Germany and South Korea and the shipbuilding, they are very revealing of these regional lock-ins. And the shipbuilding industry, that's a conclusion of the paper of this case study, is that the shipbuilding is more prone to lock-ins because they are very much spatial concentrated in urban cities. They have a monostructure. The entry and exit barriers are higher in comparison to the textile sector, and are capital intensive, and also again the role of the private interest, they are very much all linked to oligopolistic market structures. And in this study, the cases of part of northern Germany and South Korea are explored in both cases, textile and shipbuilding. And we have the case of a conclusion of the shipbuilding region on Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, if I'm pronouncing correctly, let me know if not. So the conclusion here is that there are different elements here that in which the behavior of Germany and South Korea are different. That the industrial policy that exists in this part of Germany was influenced the preservation of the existing this shipbuilding complex. They were in favor of the maintenance of this industry in the region by throwing some large amounts of subsidies that are made available for the ship industry, and there was also very successful lobbying pushing to the maintenance of this of this activity in the region. So we have here a strong regional lock-in, which partly be explained by the clear monostructure, because they wasn't envisioning different process of development, different ways of supporting the economic growth of the region, and all of these forces or subsidies or policies or lobbies led to this regional lock-in. And sometimes incapacity to find alternative ways of securing the maintenance in the or absorbing labor force, and then supporting the economic development of the region. And in the case of South Korea, in which large corporations play a role, such as Daewoo and Hyundai, the shipbuilding cluster was able, because of this cultural background of the activity, they were able, for example, to overcome the crisis of 1988. However, they found themselves at some point in this growth enabling lock-in. They were not capable of deblocking that development process. They found themselves in this lock-in, very much the result of external forces, such as some decisions from the European Union towards unfair competition, and also the competitiveness from low-cost shipbuilding in China. These processes led to lock-in processes in the region, in this region in South Korea. So contrary to the German one, in which the governance, in which we include public and non-public actors, play the role. In this context, more external forces or decisions from a supranational entity, such as the European Union, or low-cost shipbuilding from China, led to the lock-in process. And in both cases, because of that monostructure and capital intensive, they are less able to embrace or an adjustment or a renewal process. Because of the textile industry in Germany, although so they were facing themselves. So you first set the background. They faced themselves with a competition from East Asia in terms of the textile production, and then the employment decreased dramatically in the 60s and continued decreasing towards 70s and 80s. So they start suffering from a crisis. However, they embrace a restructuring process within a combination of different forces, public and private, and they were able to remain within the text. Some companies were able to remain within the sector, within the industrial textile sector, and by investing in more technical oriented textiles, by using different ways of producing their final goods. So through a combination of different factors, they were able to implement a restructuring process that led to the progress of the industry, as well as to to help the region to enter the economic development path. And in South Korea, in the textile, they suffered with automation from the 80s, and in comparison to the German case, they were not able to easily overcome primarily the competition from the neighborhood countries regarding the textile sectors. They found themselves incapable of going beyond this decline process for a number of reasons, in which the insights from this case study point out to some local clientelism or these forces of some suppliers that led them to remain in that developed path, and they resist. They also create barriers to for this sector to progress in another path, in a different direction. So I underline here again that the governance play a role very much in this restructuring process, in which you can have in which the firms, the industries, they play a role through adjustment, so internal process, or through renewal processes. But in the case of the renewal process, embracing technology, embracing the digital, also requires an institutional support and the support of political forces. That's why I bring here in the middle this idea, this concept of governance, that is important to overcome these lock-ins at the regional level. And in this table summarize ways of escaping these lock-ins. Can be through the creating different kind of business, diversifying local industry, investing in technology. Can also be the result of new organizational processes that promote a certain activity within that region. So it's necessary to build this discourse also around a new discourse around the capacity of investing in an alternative industry, and that this can lead to a successful stage further on. So there's a number of possible scenarios here when a certain region encounters itself in the lock-in process. The literature suggests a number of ways to overcoming this process, in which resilience strategies that we'll discuss later on, that also coming to play a fundamental role in today's context than in comparison to some years ago. And we spent quite a lot of time justifying the lock-ins, which is not dramatic. It's important that we do this, and without neglecting the importance of path dependence and path creation that will come next. And I will certainly bring this also in the next lecture, because again, is interlinked with what we discuss in the next lectures. First, the resilience strategies, as well as the unrelated variety in the lecture before the 13th of May, before that holiday. So more specifically, when you start reading the literature on path dependency, we'll come across of two names that are the so-called founding fathers of the path dependency theory, Paul David and Brian Arthur. They are the genesis of discussions within this path dependency, and first, the discussion was very much related to the technology development throughout the history that leads to the dependency. And then with the evolution of the discussions, the exploration of or the implementation of case studies as well, then the economic geographers fundamentally start to exploring other dimensions rather than only technology. But the pioneers are Paul David and Brian Arthur, and both in the literature, the Evolutionary Economic Geography book, they start exploring very much in detail the genesis of the path dependence through these two authors, and I'm not going through in detail of them. I'll try to bring some more day-to-day examples to the context. And they used path dependence in their original works as a description of lock-in effects in terms of technology. Okay, but nowadays this goes much more beyond the technology. Let's try to define path dependence, and I was lucky enough to find this publication by Douglas Puffert at the University of Warwick, explaining the path dependence. Is the dependence of economic outcomes, is that the dependence of economic outcomes on the path of previous outcomes rather than simply on current conditions. Means that that is basically try to understand the impact of historical process. The outcomes of the past influence what happens currently more than current conditions. Also, this is also criticized across the literature, and I also remain myself doubtful to the extent of the full applicability in practice of the path dependence. So when you are reading your materials and thinking through about path dependence, you have to also embrace this more overall view and be aware that some critics towards the path dependence exist. Because currently, I think what happens currently is that or the consumers ourselves, we call for another kind of products, or we go against some methods of production, those methods that we talked before about the garment industry, the textile industry using, for example, or child labor, or not having a fair attitude towards the employees in the global south. So we also react to the way the industries embrace their processes and also the way the products come to us. So currently there are some argumentation, mostly from geographers, from human geographers that are studying sustainability transitions, that underline that current events also influence the development of the industry, not only the past outcomes that the genesis of the path dependency underlines is that history matters in quite strongly in understanding this process. Choices made on the past influence current processes in the industry, and this can be applied to the firm level, this can be applied to the industrial act as well as to the regional level. So we have different types of discussions in the literature, focus across scales and involving also different sectors of activity. The path dependency process, to understand it, requires we look at the history, the way, explaining again how they evolved through time, how they were able to respond to certain shocks, such as economical crisis, for example, if they found themselves in lock-in processes, or if the question of lock-ins never came to their development path, and they were just simply able to progress without the need, or to implement adjustment strategies, or to find renewal processes. So path dependency through evolutionary economic geography looks at the historical processes, tries to justify progress, try to justify the lock-ins, and also try to understand how in the past these certain industrial activities were able to overcome their barriers. There are a number of examples of these path dependence processes in the literature, and the most debated one is the QWERTY keyboard. That although is the QWERTY keyboard is not the most technologically efficient, is also not the most ergonomic keyboard. The path dependency process led to the consolidation of this QWERTY keyboard in the market. So they first start with an idea. Okay, I hope I can explain this well, and I am really sorry if I can't. So they start with an idea. They came up with this QWERTY keyboard in comparison to the Dvorak keyboard. Okay, so this came up with an idea. They they gain some market share. They consolidate their position in the market, and then what became a standard. Became standard in the industrial process, to the point that different brands, Logitech, Dell, HP, whatever, start producing also QWERTY keyboards. Now there are also other, depends of very much of the country where you are located. But then although not most efficient, that a number of reasons led to the consolidation and to the standardization of this keyboard in the market. Okay, and this happens also if you think about in a less profitable equipment, such as the railway networks that we have a standardized dimension here in the center of Europe, the distance between the rails, and which differs in the Peninsula Iberica, sorry, in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal and Spain, and also differs from part from Russia and the Nordic countries, part of the Nordic countries as well. So there's the maintenance of a process that start or in a certain region, in a certain territory, or in a certain industry, and then although not the most cost efficient, not the optimal product, it consolidate the position in the market, and they find themselves locked in this development process, while others, they simply, for a number of reasons, couldn't find a position in the market, and then they were locked out of it. And then we try, here it is important to also think what kind of questions we make in economic geography. Again, we try to understand very much this spatial distribution and regional inequalities, the uneven development, why some regions can be find themselves locked in processes, and why others are able to overcome these negative lock-ins and find ways of renewing their economic structure. And because the time is concluding, and I want to try to build here a concluding slide, although I will bring this later, and before I will bring the path creation later, and the parts of the summary of the path dependence. So what the path dependency literature tells us in very much detail in Martin 2009, that these historical accidents are the genesis of this path dependence, which is not very much convincing to me and to many other of my colleagues, already some senior colleagues, debating that not the reasons behind a path is not only because of an historical accident, but also the influence of an entrepreneur, for example, of a pioneer in terms of an idea, an innovator. They also play a role in defining and developing paths, and not only historical processes. All right, and then so you go back home with this idea that paths, that the prime line of reasoning within the path dependency theory is that tries to understand that historical processes, very much unforeseen and accidents, lead to a certain path. Okay, and then in the next lecture I will tell you that there's another branch of the literature that tries to explain that the paths that exist are also the result of more premeditated, of planned interventions, or by a sector, by an industry, or by one single person, by an entrepreneur. And this contradicts part of the key features and of the path dependence. And we reached the time, and I would like to ask if you have any question, if you would like to see something clarified at this stage. Then otherwise I will pick up from where we stop here with the path dependence in the next lecture. So do you have any question at this stage? Okay, do you want to leave, or do you want me to continue elsewhere? Well, I'm free to do what you think is better. Do you have some appointment next, or I can stay for more 15 minutes to discuss to continue discussing until we reach a summary?
I have to go.
Okay.
I must be out.
All right then. So I will see you next Thursday. All right.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.